Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Art Forum. If you haven't met me before, my name's David Sequeira. I'm the director of the Margaret Lawrence Gallery, and it really is my pleasure to welcome you to Art Forum. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge the Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land that the University of Melbourne is situated on. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that for generations before the Victorian College of the Arts or the University of Melbourne was even considered, that the Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri people practiced song and dance, paintings, sculptures, they shared stories, and that these rituals continue today, continue on to today. And it is really with great joy that I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. This session of Art Forum is presented in conjunction with the Melbourne Reconciliation Network. Our guest speaker today, Brenda L Croft, is from the Gurindji and Malngin, I'm going to say it again, from the Gurindji, Malngin and Mudburra peoples from the Victoria River region of the Northern Territory of Australia, and Anglo-Australian, German, Irish, Chinese heritage. She's been involved in the Australian First Nations and broader contemporary arts and cultural sectors as an artist, an arts administrator, consultant, curator, educator and researcher since the mid-1980s. Brenda's transdisciplinary creative practice encompasses critical performative First Nations autoethnography, Indigenous storying and historiography, cultural reclamation, identity and representation. Brenda melds personal and public archives throughout her creative practice, which is represented in major public and private collections in Australia and beyond. Brenda lives and works in Canberra on Ngambri and Ngunnawal country, where she's Associate Professor, Indigenous Art History and Curatorship at the Centre for Art History and Art Theory at the Australian National University. Wherever you are, please join me in making Brenda very, very welcome.
Thank you, David. That was a mouthful, wasn't it, getting through all of that. I too pay my respects to the Bunwurrung peoples of the area, the country on which the Victorian College of the Arts is, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk on my work today. And I do that from Ngambri, Ngunnawal country as a Gurindji, Malngin, Mudburra mixed heritage woman. Now I've got a lot of slides to go through and I'll do my best to do that in 30 minutes or 25 minutes that we have. And when David invited me to present this talk on my work, I was thinking, what will I do it on? I've just actually finished my PhD, which has been a long haul over the last decade, with a few breaks in between for various reasons. But really it's a project that's been lifelong and will continue to be lifelong for me. And I don't see that there will be a stopping point until I stop. So I'll head straight into that if that's okay. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end, which David's going to field. The title of my exegesis that was attached to my practice-led doctoral research project is Korwa, which means stone tool or axe head in Gurindji, Jakartak, which is container, cup, billican or pannikin, handmade, held ground, and that will become evident as we continue. I thought I'd be a bit cheeky and start off with a particular kind of historical archive. This was a book that I had come across. I love to collect books from old bookshops, and this an Australian native standpoint, which is obviously from a very dead, pale, stale male perspective from 1912, and that is not me. I hope you can see that. So the subtext of my practice-led research, which is also a mouthful, I'm afraid, is an enduring collaborative practice-led research journey representing a distinct Australian First Nations storying, Storywork, and First Nations performative autoethnography as sub-alternative archive and methodology, created from the rememorying, reimagined standpoint of a Gurindji, Malngin, Mudburra, Anglo-Australian, Chinese, German, Irish woman. All of those things are embodied within me through both my patrilineal and matrilineal lines, and I embrace and celebrate those every day. I could tell that I would think anyone looking at that would be going, what the hell does that actually mean? It means that I have spent a considerable amount of time through my practice-led research, creative-led research project, trying to ascertain, trying to determine my particular distinct place in the world as a person of mixed heritage in this country today. I draw on personal and public archives that relate to my family and community in a lot of my work, and I have done that from the get-go, really, from the start of my creative practice back in the mid-80s. And the starting point is, for me, is often referring back to my parents. And this is a work from a series in my mother's garden from 98. And literally I'm in my mother and father's garden in Perth, in the suburb of Dianella. I think this was Christmas 1966. So I am the encapsulation of both of my parents. Drawing on public archives, over the last decade, I've been really immersing myself, and longer, I've been doing oral history interviews with family and community members since the late 80s, early 90s, and I've also drawn on historical archives of my late father, Joe Croft's materials, oral history interviews that he conducted with family and community back in the late 1980s, and an interview that my late brother Lindsay did with my father as well from that time. But what you're looking at on the screen right now is the earliest written record relating to my father and my grandmother, Bessie Croft. And this is from the police station, the Timber Creek Police Station letter book from 1926 to 27. This is from the 1st of July, 1927. And I remember reading this document, which is literally falling apart in your hands as you're looking through it. I think I was probably the first person to look at it since it had been closed and had been in the archives from the late 1920s. And was, as you can see, I think I can use my little mouse to go here. The following half-casts were sent to Darwin Half-Caste Home, which was also known as Carlin Compound. I've had to redact the names of people because I used this as a screenshot for an audiovisual work that I created, retracing country and kin, retracking country and skin, which you'll see images a little bit later, hopefully, if we get to them. But in dealing with these records from the Northern Territory Police Fire and Emergency Services Department, I was asked to redact other people's names. So we have here my father's name, Joe Quadroon, and his half-caste mother named Bessie. And the visceral response I had to reading their names in the public records, the public archives, was so profound. I burst into tears at the National Archives in the Northern Territory when I was reading them. What we're looking at here are two images that I sourced from the South Australian Museum archives from the collection. Well, it's buried within the Tyndale collection, and it's part of the Cecil James Hackett collection. He was a doctor who was conducting his own doctoral research in the 1930s. In 1934, he travelled up through the Northern Territory. He was based in Adelaide. He was doing his medicine degree through the University of Adelaide. And I was just looking on Google one day and typed in my grandmother's name, Bessie Croft, and what came up was a connection to this record, which stated that there was a photograph of her from 1934. I was fortunate, and I say that in quotation marks, to meet my grandmother with my family in 1974. I'll give a bit of backstory. My dad was born on Victoria River Downs in 1925, we think, 25, 26, most likely 1925. He was taken with my grandmother up to Carlin Compound, which was one of the government-run children's homes based in Darwin. You might have seen the news yesterday. There was the announcement of a class action being undertaken with descendants of people who went through Carlin Compound, which includes my family. And that was in the national news, certainly through ABC. It was a home that operated there from 1913 until I think just around the war period it closed because everyone was evacuated from Darwin. My grandmother was there until it closed, and then she was evacuated, and when they went back to Darwin, she was transferred to the Retta Dixon Children's Home, which is where she resided until she died in December 1974. But my father was removed from her care and taken from Carlin Compound in 1931, taken down to the Pine Creek Boys Home until 1933, then further south from 1933 to 1940, he was at the Bungalow Half-Caste Home, and then he ended up being sent to boarding school over in Queensland until 1943. So he didn't see his mother again. He saw her once for one night when he was leaving the bungalow and flew through Darwin to go to Charters Towers. And he talks about that in oral history interviews I've conducted with him. But we didn't meet up with her again until 1974, just shortly before she died. I was so excited to find out that there were images of her in the South Australian Museum's archives until I was informed by the wonderful family history research staff there very gently that she was part of medical records. And as you can see from these images which were sent to me, she had been a subject of Hackett's research for his thesis on boomerang legs and yaws in Australian Aborigines. So my desire to see my grandmother was tempered by seeing truncated sections of her body and realising that she had been basically a subject of his medical research. There's much more debasing discussion in his published research. He really did examine her, and I don't know if he took photographs of other areas of her body that he talks about in his research, but the anger I felt in seeing her reduced to this was profound. I'm going to whip through some of these because I'm getting aware of time. Images that I've drawn on in previous works. My father is the altar boy on the left here. This is at the bungalow, half-caste home in Alice Springs. This is around 1938. My dad was about 13 years old at that time. Charlie Perkins is a little boy who's turned away here. And this image was reproduced in Charlie's book, A Bastard Like Me, which came out, I think, about 1976. And my mother recognised my father in the image, and then he remembered. So this idea of remembering, he had forgotten this experience in his life until he saw it reproduced in a publication. The series, I created a series called Blood Type, and I'm going to duck through a little bit and see if I can find the image relating to my, sorry about this. No, we'll go back. So I did a series in 2016 called Blood Type series for a solo exhibition, Subalternative Dreams, which was part of my doctoral research. That was shown at Stills Gallery, and this series was part of that. I was drawing on the references to the image of my grandmother here, which you'll see later in the slideshow, and also drawing on 19th century photographic processes, in this case wet plate collodion processing, tin types, which I then scanned, and they were digitized and enlarged, very large scale, and text was overlaid. And these comments, these statements on these images relate to statements that were in press clippings in 1944 relating to my father when he was awarded a scholarship to go to All Souls School in Charters Towers, and then when he graduated from there in 1943 as school captain, he received a bursary to go to the University of Queensland, and this made national news. But the descriptors for him at the time were ranged from native, Abo, full blood, half blood, to brilliant, scholar, and all of those things in between. So the images reference my father as well as being self-portraits. I use references to Christianity a lot in my work, not because I consider myself a Christian, but because a lot of these policies that were in effect over at least all of the 20th century, and in many ways we could say there is still a de facto policy engaged with the removal of First Nations children from their families and communities. I won't dwell on that right here, but from the earliest days of contact in the late 18th century, people were removed and displaced from their communities. Children were removed and placed in institutions. I've also, within my practice, the collaborative aspect of it was working with family and community, both out at community Kalkaringi and Dagaragu in the Victoria River region, which is about 100 kilometres from Victoria River Downs. The Wave Hill station was one of the largest stations up in that area. Victoria River Downs was another huge station that was nearby. All of that Victoria River region, named after Queen Victoria. The Gurindji, Malngin, Mudburra, Bilanara, Mudburra, Nyarinman peoples are all along that Victoria River. And what we're looking at here is the gravesite of my father. My brother and I took his ashes home after he passed away in 1996. And I worked with community up in Kalkaringi and Dagaragu on a project called Yidjani, True Stories from Gurindji Country. It was a Gurindji history project conducted with the Karankani Art and Culture Centre at Kalkaringi. The Munkura Gurindji Rangers, working with elders from community. Penny Smith on the left here is the director of the Art Centre. Felicity Meekins is a linguist with the University of Queensland, working with another linguist, Erica Chirola, and Gurindji community members. We went out visiting, who are also include family, went out visiting really important sites right throughout that country. And I was privileged to be able to document that trip in 2014. So these are some images from some of the sites we travelled to. Malyali, Lipananku, First Wave Hill Station, and the actual hill in the background is the geographical Wave Hill, why the station was named Wave Hill. This was the original site of the first station from 1882 to 1925. Travelling with elders such as the late Ronnie Wave Hill, who passed away, I think last year or the year before, talking to young children at that site. I've got links throughout the PowerPoint that you can look at some of the things I'm referencing there. This is an image of the actual Wave Hill walk-off track. Some of you may be familiar. The Gurindji community was renowned for their sovereign action of walking off Wave Hill Station, the second Wave Hill Station, on the 23rd of August 1966, and establishing a community at Dargaragu and then at Kalkaringi. They stayed on what initially was a strike for equal wages, which became the birth of the National Land Rights Movement. And they stayed on strike for almost 9 years. A portion of their traditional homelands was handed back by the Labor Prime Minister Gough Whitlam on the 16th of August in 1975. That track, the Wave Hill Walk-Off route, is now on the National Heritage List, and it's been on there since 2007. It's about 22 kilometres long. It wasn't traversed all in one go. It was traversed over probably a 6-month period. People walked from the Jinparak homestead, camped for a night here at a place called Junani, then moved to the Victoria River camp and camped near what was called the police, I think it was the police station. That was really pretty much all that was there at Kalkaringi at the time. It was known as a drover's camp, and then stayed there for a number of months and then relocated and established Dargaragu. So these are two communities that are probably best known nationally through the song by Paul Kelly and Kev Carmody of From Little Things, Big Things Grow. I walked that track as part of my research, practice-led research with family members. I also walked it by myself, and I did that as an homage to not only the people who walked it in 1966, 200 or so Aboriginal stockmen, women and children, but also for family members who were removed, like my father and grandmother, and people who were never able to go back there, like my late brother. I incorporated this notion of performativity, walking on country, with family members and also solo, into visual representation through still and moving image. So this is the collaborative, critical, Indigenous performative autoethnographic component of my research project. These are singular images from a series, Wave Hill, Victoria River Country, different aspects of that Wave Hill walk-off track, working with family members such as my late grandfather, Peanut Pontiari, at places on the Wave Hill walk-off track. The Karatak, the tin pannikin, the tin cup that was collected from Jinparak, the second Wave Hill station rubbish dump in 2014, is in the top left-hand corner. So the idea of korwa, stone axe, to tin cup, to katak, to tin cup, was looking at the idea of the ready-made, the handmade, the idea of ancient First Nations knowledges in more recent Indigenous knowledges, the crossover between all of those kinds of connections and impacts on Gurindji country. And within my research project was also the idea of, well, where is home? If you're a displaced person, you haven't lived on your traditional homelands, which is not just my experience as a Gurindji, Malngin, Mudburra person, but hundreds of other people who are descendants of people taken away. How do we create that home and that sense of country within us? And how do we carry that within us? I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the Northern Territory emergency response, the intervention that was enacted in 2007, ironically the same year as the Wave Hill walk-off track was placed on the National Heritage List. That was enacted by the Liberal government, but also put into place by the Labor government that came in after, and the ongoing impact of that. My work very much melds the personal and the political. Here I am with family members on an artist's camp and also part of walking the walk-off track. These people have been very much my guides throughout this whole process and continue to be. And this is where the collaborative element comes into play. I also worked very closely with family and friends, community, Gurindji community, who were part of displaced community, removed from country and taken up to places in like Darwin or Alice Springs, retracing and finding the traces left of those places. Channel Island Leprosarium is just outside of Darwin, the heritage site. It's also on the Heritage Register. My aunt and uncle were residents there. They were the longest residents there until it was closed. It was relocated to East Arm, and they were the last two people who were living there. Going back to places such as the Retta Dixon Children's Home site in Darwin, which was the last place I spent with my grandmother, Bessie, who was the laundress there. This is the only photo we have of my father and grandmother together, for various reasons I won't go into now. The idea of pilgrimages back to different places as well, and the idea of re-memory. Sometimes you have to build those memories when those memories aren't there. There are certain, I'm lucky, and there's a lot of reference to my family within the archives, but for many people that doesn't exist. The works were realised within the solo exhibition I referred to earlier, but also most significantly in an exhibition still in my mind, Gurindji Location, Experience and Visuality, through the University of New South Wales Art and Design Galleries, in collaboration with UQ Art Museum, Karankani Art and Culture Centre, and some input from the Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language, because there was bilingual exhibition text and audio within the exhibition space. What you are looking at here are still images and installation images of the major experimental immersive AV work that I created as part of that, retracking country and skin. And for me, it was really essential that people from community who participated and contributed to the project also attended the opening and spoke at public programs. I didn't try and speak on their behalf as much as I could. I tried to make sure that people were able to talk and participate from their own standpoints and positionalities. So we'll just go through some of these. These are just different installation shots from various venues. It's been, as I said, at UNSW Art and Design, University of Queensland Art Museum, Charles Darwin University Galleries, Araluen Cultural Centre in Alice Springs, South Australian Museum during the Tarnandy Cultural Festival. It's coming to the Drill Hall Gallery later this year. It's been at Geraldton Art Museum. It will go to Harvey Bay Regional Gallery, Melbourne Museum. It's coming to in December, and will continue touring until at least the end of next year. So the Kuratorship, or the stone axe, the idea of it being a handheld object, it's here being held by my niece Leah and her granddaughter Chica. I've reproduced or recreated this stone axe with the permission of family and community into multiples through a residency undertaken at the Canberra Glassworks. And this is some examples of some of those works, the multiples of the stone axe, the Kuratorship. I've also honoured my mother in my work with a solo show, Heart in Hand, which was at Canberra Contemporary Art Space in 2018. As I said, I'm very much a mix of those two people. Everything I do is about honouring family members no longer here. My brother and my father here in this image. And they have also been honoured within Canberra by having a street named after them in the suburb of Bonner, to honour their contribution to First Nations education. So we saw that image in the beginning. I'm nearly finished, David. I reworked this into a diptych heart shut mouth scream, where my visual call and response to that image from that 1934 medical record of my grandmother was to reposition myself as a call across the decades to her. That initial image was taken on the 17th of May 1934 at Carlin Compound. I was born on the 17th of May 1964, exactly 3 decades later, and we ended up being able to spend only 3 weeks together. Good, I did it, managed it. That's my final image.
Wow, amazing. Not amazing that you finished finished with the final images and in time, but it's such an incredible journey. And I know, Brenda, that you have many, many strings to your bow, and that, you know, refining this refining a practice that spans over many decades to this focus, you know, must have taken something. And thank you for concentrating on this body of work. Thank you also for, you know, the outrageous generosity that you expressed, not just sharing your work, but sharing your life and your family's life with us, with today. We really, really appreciate that. If you have a question for Brenda, if you could put that into the Q&A facility, that would be great. I have a question straight away, and that is, how do you think your family history shows up in your curatorship?
Do you mean my curatorship of my own work, or the collaborative show, or the broader work that I've done?
I would say the broader. I mean, it's very clear how it shows up in your curatorship, but how do you think those values or those sorts of ideas that permeate your studio practice so intensely, how do you think, if at all, do they show up in your curatorial practice?
They're absolutely the foundation for it, I think. I mean, I always curated exhibitions I wanted to see, so I'm selfish in that sense. But I also had amazing mentors, you know, who provided me with the space to be able to do that. And it was in the decade or so that I spent within the public gallery sector, longer than that really, 3 decades. It was an honour to be able to advocate on behalf of other creative artists. But as you know, David, you knew me from our time together at the NGA, National Gallery. I didn't ever shy away from putting my politics out there on the line. And for me, the personal and the political are completely, they're one of the same thing. You know, you'll flip them around. You can't separate them. Just as I can't, what foregrounds who I am is my First Nations heritage, because that's my lived experience in this country through what was enacted upon the bodies of my father and my grandmother, literally, as you can see from those images. But I also have tried to include that within my curatorial approach to different things. And collaboration's always been essential. That's always been at the forefront from when I did the Adelaide Biennial back in 2000 at the Art Gallery of South Australia. Beyond the Pale was about collaboration. So for me, I love collaborating with other people, whether it's working with people like Hetty Perkins or Stephen Gilchrist or other curators or other artists. You know, I get so much more out of working as part of a community rather than, even though I'm a bit of a lone wolf as well, you know, I am a bit of a loner, but I really enjoy working as part of a team. If that's not too convoluted.
That's really, really clear. Now, a bunch of questions have come through. First one, I love the shadows or the silhouette images in your work. Can you talk a bit more about this?
Well, the shadow ended up being a bit of a character, I think. The country was a character. The country was its own personality. Well, not personality. People are country. We come from country. If we're removed from country, you can see how people are. You know, I'm really interested in how Alexis Wright has written of the idea of the internal I think she says the internal migration. I haven't got it right in front of me, but this idea of inward migration, sorry, as a means of sovereignty. If you can't live on country, your own country, you carry that notion of it within yourself. So that cipher, the shadow is preceding me in that work, retracing country and kin, and it's a never-ending journey. It can't ever really end, and so the shadow. Am I chasing my own shadow? Am I following my shadow? Is the shadow a representative of people my ancestors, the people who went before me? This was the first time I really included, I think, myself in my work in that way. I've sent you a link, I think, to the 20-minute 2-channel video, which people who've participated today, if they're interested in watching, they can see the work as a 2-channel work, and listen to the audio with that as well, and get a sense of the walking, the actual act of walking as a sovereign action.
Another question is, how do you navigate the use of imagery and objects of family members in your work?
Well, I guess I have my mum to thank for that. I think of myself as an archivist, not a hoarder. But the objects, I think of the traces of people who've made the object. That stone axe, that kurwa, I say, found me. I didn't find it. It was at a place called Bore 17, which is a bore on country when we went on that big 2014 sites visit, and we stopped at a place called Bore 17, which is, that's all that's there is a windmill to bring water up for cattle. It's still a working cattle station, has been since the 1880s. And stepped out of the troop carrier I'd been driving, and there was that phenomenal korwa or stone axe on the ground. So it found me, I didn't find it. And it's only in my caretaking at this moment. But the object, when I picked it up, it fitted perfectly within my palm, as if it had been made for me, as if it was, I could feel the hand almost of the person who had made it, who had used it. And the reason for making multiples of it was to try and make copies that can, give to people as well. Once the exhibition finishes, it's got to be determined by my where the actual original object will go to. In the case of my mother's objects, they keep her, my mum died in 2010, so in a way it's about keeping what was precious to her close to me. And as you can see with your beautiful work in the background of your image, the idea of arranging those objects is really, for me, it's really meditative and healing. It's a bit like I'm an arranger. I love to arrange things. I collect things. It keeps the people who were the creators of those objects or the holders of those objects close to me. I don't know how that's going to go as I get older. But they help me re-memory things about those individuals, whether it's my little brother's, my brother who's passed away, his little baby shoes, which were included in that exhibition, heart in hand, or his little teddy bear. He's been gone over a quarter of a century now, but I can still smell him in that work as well. And I think all of those things are about keeping people close, people that we love close to us.
Well, that sort of segues into the next question, which is, how are you deploying the notion of rememorizing for the next generation and the idea of legacy?
I use the term rememory in the way that Toni Morrison has written about it. So sometimes you have to make the memories that aren't there. You have to kind of imagine them into being. So for me, there will always be gaps in whatever the archive is I'm drawing upon. There are gaps in my father's life. I guess I'm drawn to photographic imagery because there was so little of him from, back to a certain point. And in my exegesis, which was approved just recently, there are hundreds of images. The images are, and they were the things that always drew me as a kid, were the images of, and the gaps that were in those family archives. Taking it into the future, I mean, I guess that's why I work across different disciplines. I write, I publish, I make creative work, I do walking projects. I'm working on a walking project, hopefully with local community where I'm based, local and regional community, because that walk off track has inspired me to work with local people on a particularly important track that was here in the 1920s from a community called Brungle. And I think people can engage with those kinds of found materials and found objects, and everybody's drawn to photographs in their own family archives. They are the representations of people who are no longer with us. So that is how we remember them and how we create a legacy for those people who had such an impact on our own lives. And I certainly do that within my work. And it's filling in part of the national story that's been so invisible, and not just invisible deliberately, so unintentionally, it's also been deliberately, willfully negated. And so I have the opportunity and the capacity to articulate. I mean, my existence is a sovereign act, I was meant to just disappear. People like me were just meant to disappear into the fabric of Australian society. And we're still seeing, every day we see the idea of the Australian nation state, or, what represents Australia, who represents Australia. I'm not Australian. I'm a mix of all of those different things, but I'm a First Nations woman first and foremost.
Brenda, we're going to leave it there, but I really do want to speak on behalf of everybody who's joined into this Zoom and people who'll watch the recording later. Just a big, mega thank you, not just for today, but for your incredible contribution. I mean, I know, your time at the National Gallery is only one part of your practice, but I could have introduced you that went for pages, for people who know Brenda was the curator involved in the commissioning of First Nations Australian works for the Quai Branly in Paris. I mean, these were just extraordinary projects. And so thank you, not just for today, but thank you for just a stunning career and contribution to Australian cultural development. And to everybody who's joined us, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week for Art Forum. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.
My pleasure.